and you're about to see a real live miracle. He's going to sing the song that inspired the title for this book. Here's Danny Brooks with Miracles for Breakfast.
Once there was a man working on a chain gang, laying blacktop on a highway in the Southland. Many years later, on the same old road, driving with his family in a brand new automobile. I believe dreams come alive. Miracles for breakfast happen all the time. I believe in miracles. Oh, yes, I do. I believe.
I always say if Danny Brooks was on a battlefield, it would take a lot of bullets to bring him down.
He's a special person. He has an inner strength, and he shares that in his stories with people, and that's a gift.
Singing really moves me. Danny's singing, it's a lot like Otis Redding. It's like just primal truth working its way through a body and a soul that's got experience. That's worth a lot.
Well, I'm not the first person to say that Danny Brooks is the real deal, because anybody whose opinion I value, sits in a room with him or goes to hears him play one song and knows that that's the truth. It's just the way it is.
There's never any vibes other than love, and that's a pleasure. You get to be in this business for a long time. It's really nice when you feel people.
His songwriting is prolific. I mean, if there's anything that he's close to genius at, it's songwriting. A lot of guys take them 5, 6, 7 years to come up with a concept every year. 9, 10 new songs.
His music, it's profound, and he's tapped into, I think, the universal truths that we don't see, but we all feel them. And when you're hearing Danny sing his song, it's almost like he's singing your song.
See him play, and I'm practically in tears watching him, because I can't believe that anybody could actually turn their life around like that so well. It's amazing to watch somebody transform and get even better than what they were before.
He helped me with my dream. A serious pivotal moment, there's probably a dozen in everybody's career. I think he was one in mine at the very, 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 very beginning.
Brought up in the church, so all that kind of spirit is there in his music and in his performance, because he wants to touch people's souls. He doesn't just want them to be entertained. I mean, he's trying to reach out to people. It's now April the 11th. We left home January 27th. So we're 2.5 months into a just slightly under 5-month road trip. We do 50,000 miles, 175 dates all over North America.
Boy, Mississippi, I know we're in Mississippi.
Started off in Houston, worked our way through Louisiana at the David Wade prison.
We're in Alabama, I know we're in Alabama too.
Start from Houston, work our way to Florida, up Ontario, up to BC, down, we'll hit Nevada. Then New Orleans.
And then, as always, we always try to go into prisons and rehabs.
One day Angola, we were in Ocala, Florida. It was the largest women's prison in North America.
Then we hit Ontario in mid-March, and I think we're there for maybe a month.
House of James in
Abbotsford,
BC.
And drive west to Calgary, and we have a few gigs in Calgary, then back over to British Columbia for a couple of months.
Where we're playing at the...
Mike's Juke Joint.
Mikey's, Juke Joint. I thought it was Roadhouse, but you're right, Mikey's Juke Joint.
I'm always right. You think you'd know that after 30 years.
Danny does all the booking, and sometimes it just boggles my mind.
And then we head down to the Sand Dollar Lounge in Nevada, Las Vegas.
He's added another one in New Mexico right after that, and then we'll get home at the end of June. So it's a long haul.
Hell, I stood there in my prison at the crossroads of my soul. There were two trains that were leaving. One would never take me home. I cried out in the midnight hour, Lord have mercy on my soul. Give you room for one more trouble, man, take my hand and lead me on. Oh, 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 oh. Lord, I know that you hear me, that you hear me when I call. If you're trouble, take my hand and lead me on. Lead me on, take me home. I'm passing through, I'm just passing through. Take my hand, lead me on. Take me home, lead me on.
Good morning, y'all. Little Miss Debbie and I are headed for Vegas. We're just in the U.S. right now, just south of Oroville, heading for Twin Falls, Idaho. First stop, 655 miles. The next day will be easier at 495. Good weather, roads are good, life is good, we're still breathing, everything's okay. God bless you. Hope to see you, all you Nevadians, at the, what's the name of the club?
Sand Dollar Lounge.
Sand Dollar Lounge.
Vegas, baby.
All right. We're here playing about the good news, and we're going to talk about the good news. That's what the gospel is, the good news.
Let me tell you now, in this world you have tribulation. In this world you have tribulation.
Lord, we just ask for you to bless the reading of your word, and as we look into it, that you feed us and nourish us as only you can. We ask all of these things in Jesus Christ. Amen. Dan?
Because I know it's so easy to get down on yourself, and that is what the enemy of your soul wants you to do. If you keep on taking to the Lord, it pick you up like it does so many times. Oh, and when you see the heart that the Lord sends me, oh,
When we first moved down to Texas, looking back now, it was my health scare that paved the way for us to move down here. That was May the 2nd, 2010. I was playing Threadgills.
And I saw he was kind of tired, and he was just, he was short of breath, and he was winded. And
3 songs to go, and I'm having trouble breathing. And Lynn Daniel leans over and said, "Danny, are you all right?"
You know, I asked him if he's okay. I'm gonna have to just sit here a minute, and I'm gonna be okay. And I helped him load up and everything, and he just sat there.
"Lynn, I'm just having trouble breathing. It's really hot in here." What I didn't tell him was that I had shooting pains up both arms, my chest. I was out of sorts, but I went into automatic pilot.
All of a sudden, he reached down and he just brought it, man, and it was just did a powerful, packed show.
When we finally finished those 3 songs, I sat on the chair and I was more or less just dazed and confused.
This man who looked like he was on his last leg, and then all of a sudden, here come the energy. He pulled it out from somewhere, and he did great.
Danny had a heart attack on stage, and I believe it was maybe in Texas, somewhere far down south, and he was by himself. And he called me, actually, and he was in terrible shape.
And he said, "God, am I having a heart attack? And if I am, would you please stop it? I just got down to Texas. I got to send money home to Debi. I don't have any health insurance."
This is an example of what an artist might have to do. He had to drive from that spot, and it was far south, back up here to Canada, so that he could get to the doctor.
Anyways, I ended up playing in that Texas heat for another almost 6 weeks. And it was a grueling 25 gigs over the next, I think, 38 days.
And he said to me, "Just pray for me, Michelle, because I don't even want Debi to know, because she'll just worry herself sick."
I had 5 completely blocked arteries. And he said, "You need to get your doctor in here to get you in here right away. This is something you don't trifle with." And that's when I discovered that I was no longer bulletproof.
After his heart surgery, I knew I couldn't trust him to drive back and forth to Texas and stop and rest and get a motel room rather than driving 32 hours straight. So the move had to be made.
I immediately called Debi and said, "Debi, I found our new home. We're moving to Austin." And I could see her rolling her eyes over the phone lines thinking, "Oh, it used to be Memphis, used to be Nashville, New York. This is just another city." But when she came down here for the Austin City Limits Festival that we performed at, she caught on quite quick. She felt it too.
When least expected, fate come tumbling right on into you. You better be ready. You might be a cab driver. You might be tending bar. Take care of your bartender. You might be a lady of the evening. You might be a politician, God help you. You might be a preacher man, you might be a businessman. My apologies if I've offended any ladies of the evening. No matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, you gotta be bringing it and giving it your best and then some. You never know.
My first discovery in Texas was there was a creative vibe, especially in Austin when I heard the history of threadgills. And I took it to heart that, man, if I ever had to dig deep, now is the time. You know, all the greats that came out of Texas from, you know, blues guys like T-Bone Walker, country people like the Possum, George Jones, rock and roll, Buddy Holly, ZZ Top, Janis Joplin, Blind Willie Johnson. These are powerful figures in the music industry. And there was that feeling in Texas that, you know, you really got to be on your game. You got to bring it. And I realized right then and there that Texas was going to be a type of finishing school, if you will.
Oh, my mother played Jimmy Rogers. First songs I learned with Jimmy Rogers. Like all around the water tank.
Million miles from home.
Other times it's misery. Sometimes you got trouble. Every time's it's misery. Well, he was the only one, him and the Carter family. It seems like they started country music. Hang around with me. And you just to still down. And I was just on edge. Everybody in town was on edge. Wanted to go number one.
So did it take to the 13th week?
13th week.
13th, wow.
Yeah.
If a woman doesn't kill you, she'll drive you insane. Love's about to get me down, but I sure do like the pain.
Some good lyrics.
Yeah. Daryl Stadler.
There you go.
I tell you, he sounds like Ralph Stanley. Better than Ralph Stanley. I love you, Daryl.
That work?
In Texas here, it doesn't matter the style of music so much you're playing. They want to know, are you giving it? Are you bringing it? If you're giving your all in all, no matter what genre it is, they'll get behind you. But you got to mean it.
The music really grabs our heart and our soul. I first heard Danny on Houston radio, KPFT 90.1 FM, and I loved it the first time I heard it. I went and bought a CD. I was introduced to Danny and Debi by our DJ friend in Houston, Blueshound, KPFT. We became personal friends, and every time I listen to a Danny Brooks song, I'm moved by it. It's spiritual, it's blues, it's rock and roll. I love it all, Dave.
We're hoping you'll get that lyric out pretty soon so we can go fly.
Yeah, why isn't this guy riding around in limousines already? We've said that so many times.
Oh, he's the best.
Yeah.
Well, Danny's an old soul. Yes. And let's just play on that word for a minute. He and I share this common great love for soul music and rhythm and blues. Because when I first got to Toronto, I did an all-night show, which was nothing but R&B at the old CKFH at Grenville and Young, FH standing for Foster Hewitt. And he heard that show back in the day. And but that music up here in Canada now, it doesn't resonate, especially with younger people. So Danny had to geographically go somewhere where they got him.
I remember him coming to me saying, I'm moving to Texas. And I went, whoa, like, whoa. He goes, I've thought about it. In my heart, it's where our music came from, Verge. And I went, wow, you know, you're right.
And I found that the Texas people, if you were bringing it, regardless of your level of performance and technical know-how, they want to feel you. If you're giving it, then they're behind you. Heading out from Calgary, heading to Kamloops for our gig in Abbotsford at the House of James this Friday, the 26th. We'll see y'all out there.
Sometimes this world so disheartening.
I was born 1951, December 16th, and at that time I was the third of what would become 8 brothers and sisters. And my parents lived in the East End of Toronto at that time. When they moved to West End, that I have most of my memories from, Mount Dennis, we had a small house on number 1 Rutherford. I recall it being a blue-collar neighborhood, a lot of good, honest, hard-working folk.
Rutherford and Weston Road between Jane and Eglinton. There was a Pentecostal church at the top of the street, and at the bottom of the street were the train tracks.
And like the Texas Cannonball preacher John Hagee once said, I had a drug problem in that I was drugged to church 6 times a week. It was a very strict upbringing.
As long as I can remember, church was very much a part of our family. We attended the Pentecostal church at the top of the street.
And then my dad came home one night, late at night, and he was a changed man. And he had went to evangelistic outreach on Lamport Stadium, and he was drunk out of his mind. He heard this gospel music and stumbled into the park and fell down not far from where the preacher A.A. Allen was preaching from. And he said while he was passed out, he heard heavenly music, and he came to, and as he came to, the A.A. Allen yelled out, "You, sir, are a drunk, and you need to get saved and get your life in order. Get up here now." And my dad said he got up and followed the order and walked up to him and gave his heart to the Lord. And he went, before my dad became a man of faith, he was a gangster and a very hard man. My mom said my dad was always a good man. But when he came back from World War II, the war had changed him.
We read the Bible at home every day. It was called Family Altar. And for example, if I was out playing road hockey with my friends, Dad would open the door after the dinner hour, "Michael, family altar." And so we would all come and read the Bible.
If people knocked on my door to ask me to come out to hang out with them, if we were having Bible reading, my dad corralled them. They all had to come in, sit down, and when he finished reading the Bible, we all got on our knees and he prayed. And I often wondered, why did people keep coming back, knocking on the door around that time?
You say your dad became, well, in your eyes, he became a spiritual giant.
Yes.
You wrote a song for him.
Yes, I did. He could walk on water.
Walk on the water. He who walk on the water, children. He who walk on the water, walk down the high road.
I started at a young age, probably around, I would say 6, that I had definiteness of purpose. I didn't know that phrase at the age of 6, but I had it nonetheless, in that I knew that I wanted to perform on the Grand Ole Opry, and as the local country station, CFGM 1320, said, I wanted to be a country gentleman. And that was my mindset.
And my earliest memories of, again, around Danny center around music. But music, Mom had some old 78 vinyls of Hank Williams and Luke the Drifter. And again, early memories, I can hear Luke the Drifter singing 6 More Miles to the Graveyard, and Hank Williams, I Saw the Light.
Growing up, Greg would be going to Buffalo to buy all these soul records by Sam Cooke, Otis Redding, Bobby Blue Bland, Joe Tex. So putting all that together really shaped my musical taste. And I should get back to the church. even though it was a predominantly white church, there was black people there, but it was black styled music. So between the church, my mom's Hank Williams and Reverend Jumpin' Jim Jericho, Elvis did a couple of his songs, and these songs that my brother, the records my brother was bringing home, I didn't realize it at the time that I grew up on a real heavily Southern style of music.
Hey y'all, little Miss Debi and I are just heading to the David Wade prison here in Homer, Louisiana. We've been coming here for the last 5 years, and we always have a good time. We love the men, and we're looking forward to having a good time tonight. Think about the people behind the bars tonight. We take for granted our freedoms and all the things we're capable of doing. Sometimes it's so easy to get caught up in what we don't have and what we're looking for. We got our freedom, and we live in a country where we are free. But say a prayer tonight for those that have made mistakes and they're paying for them right now. I was born in Memphis, but Memphis lives in my soul. I was born down in Memphis, but Memphis lives in my soul.
By the time I was 12, I started putting the band together, and that was with Richard Hicks on bass, Gary Jefferson on drums, and Eddie Jacob on guitar, and myself on guitar. And that was the very first band that I had. And from then on, especially when the Beatles came out, well, we all had dreams that we were going to be like the Beatles.
Found the pool of the Mississippi, won't be the same no more.
But when I was 15 and 16, I'm hearing about this great soul singer guy that's got energy beyond belief, and from what he said to me, he was hearing the same thing, that there was this really little guy north of the highway with a great band that was packing church basements.
Tony Flame was the second lead singer of the Down Child Blues Band, and he was always larger than life. He'd be standing on the street corner snapping his fingers and singing. I was 13 and 14, and I looked up to this guy, and I wanted to sing and be like Tony.
A big influence of mine growing up. Tony was larger than life all the time I knew him, but musically speaking, he was more than just an enthusiastic, kind of like a mentor. But musically, nobody had as much enthusiasm than Tony. Tonight when I was singing, I felt like he was on stage.
Danny, you don't have to play fancy. He said, you know why those old blues guys sound so good? And I said, why, Tony? He said, because they're playing only what they know, but they give every ounce of what they got into that little what they know. He said, and everybody tries to copy it and they can't.
You can still see him kind of doing that stuff. If you see something and you want it. And he was just so soulful at it. So that was, you know, I was up close and personal. He really galvanized more soul in my spirit.
A couple of guys before us that taught us that. George Oliver is one. I still see George. He's 72 years old and does the splits. Danny grabbed that from his heroes.
Dances were a big thing. And then we started playing the odd club, but mostly it was dances and dance halls. And by the time I was 17, then I started zeroing in that you had a right.
When I met him, he was on fire. He was so focused. He was so non-focused with school. and so focused on, I'm full-time, man. This is it. This is my life passion.
The first really good band I had was with Richard Hicks, and we called it Brandy Scotch and a Kingdom Show Band. And we had a horn section. We had a very good keyboard player who, like Garth Hudson, he could show the band. He was very good at arranging. And we had this beautiful black lady, Brandy, I forget her last name, Virgil Scott, and myself. And we did all the stage antics, running across the stage, clasping hands and doing the splits, and throwing our mics down, pulling it back, and doing all the James Brown stuff.
Other singers go, if I could only sound like that. He had that when he was 15. I thought to myself, when I first met him and heard him, I went, that's what a soul man sounds like.
And he already had a legendary career. He never talked about it much, but at the age of 16 or 17, he was in California, Los Angeles, looking at a big recording career. You know, Pretty Boy, rock. Yeah, he was going that route. He was already writing, he was already playing. He had the look, you know, but not long hair, clean cut for that look. And that turned out badly for him.
I went to Boston in '67 with the Stroke review, and that was an all-Italian band. Joey Accabacchio, who owned Ruan's, a nightclub in Barrie.
My next band was very well known throughout the city, and I was 17, 18 in the fall, and we became very, very, very well known. During rehearsals of that next band for me,
That's okay, take your time.
God, I love this guy. I often thought, how would Danny do this? That's what I learned.
I auditioned for his band as a bass player when I was 15, and I had to borrow a bass for it because I was only really a guitar player at that time. And also I was the youngest guy out of them all. I think they were about 4 years older than me or so. And so I go up into Weston, somebody's house, I can't remember. They had a bass amp for me. I played, then they wanted to hire me, which was kind of funny. Because all of a sudden now I'm in a band that's going to be playing bars. And at that time, at 15, I hadn't really done that yet.
In the room, and I'd be daydreaming that, you know, I went from being that country gentleman wanting to sing in the Opry, I wanted to sing like these black guys. There was something that touched me, like it just reached out of the record and grabbed my heart and said, this is where it's really at. Singing about real true blue feelings, these are real issues, and that never left me, and it never will. And no matter what changes have happened musically, a good soul ballad with a good message is always going to have a place.
Being Canadian boys and not playing hockey when you're 15 and 16, very interesting. Where are they? Oh, they're in the basement rehearsing. They're rehearsing what? Oh, he's a singer. He's a what? We were a little bit outcast, but at the same time, with the British invasion and Motown and all of it exploding, we were instantly cool, I think, also.
We grew up with Sam and Dave and Stax and Bolt and Solomon Burke and Wilson Pickett and, you know, James Brown, all those guys, and the Toronto Sound with Dominic Turano and you know, the Soul Crusade and all that stuff. And that was all going on when we were here.
Look at this beautiful double rainbow, and there's the pot of gold right there. This is in Osoyoos, BC. Just shades of the double right there. Man, it was so sunny out, we were going to walk to the lake. But I don't think we're going to do it now. further east on Yonge Street, and just down by Dundas was the Colonial Tavern. And I lived right around the corner from the Colonial. I was 15 at the time. I was living on Shooter Street, and I walked around the corner and saw this great big marquee sign that said, "This week, Muddy Waters. Next week, John Lee Hooker." I tried to sneak in. Guy grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and said, "Get lost, kid. You ain't old enough." I said, "Sir, I just moved out of the house. Muddy Waters and Hank Williams are my two favorite artists. Could I come in and see Muddy just for 3 songs?" He looked at me, and I guess he had a kid brother back home. He said, "See that upper balcony up there?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You stand there. Well, I can keep an eye on you, and if you try to sneak a drink, I'm kicking you out of your ass. Agreed?" I said, "Yes, sir." I stayed there and watched that whole night, and for the next several months, I went to Blues University. In that upper balcony, I wasn't far. I mean, maybe 20 feet from where that balcony jutted out to look down on Muddy.
I was just 15, Colonial Tavern, sitting up in the upper balcony, saw Muddy Waters.
I kind of had Muddy all to myself. I mean, there was people downstairs, but there wasn't many people upstairs.
It don't get much better than that.
To this day, I kind of style my, because he had a real down-home persona on stage.
Johnny Hooker, come in the room.
He talked to people, and he was very engaging with his audience. And I learned from that.
John Lee moan in the blue, how, don't get more real than that. Brother, ain't that the truth?
That I discovered Taj Mahal. And then that brought me to another level, because Taj Mahal at that time took from what the old masters offered, and he bridged the gap to the new people coming up, like the Eric Claptons and the British rock scene. I thought Taj Mahal was a great catalyst, merging the old and the new. At that time, it was already ingrained in me, the melodic sensibilities and the songwriting of those Joe Tex recordings, the Solomon Burke. A lot of the blues at that time was 3 chords. Rhythm and blues was incorporating a 4th, a 7th. So it was the melody expanded. So I've always had that in me I like cross-pollinating the different styles.
Now, son, you can do what you want. Hang your head and cry. Or you can look up, son, and find all the strength that'll get you by. It's what you give others that'll give you your peace of mind. Oh, you gotta roll on. Yeah, you gotta roll on. You gotta roll on. You gotta roll on. Don't look to the left or the right, because you never go wrong. Never go wrong. Never go wrong. Never go wrong, son. What I say, never go wrong, son. Whoa, 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 whoa. Never go wrong, son. Do it right.
And I was always a Stones fanatic. I grew into appreciating the Beatles later in life. But even though at the young age, I thought, I want to be like the Beatles. I liked it. She loved you, yeah. That was great stuff. But when I caught on to the Stones, I gravitated, because they were taking that old black form music, and there was just something raw about it. It was just wonderful.
In maybe the next 5 years, he just established himself as a working band. And he was unusual because as much as blues clubs were good for him, he'd go to any rock bar or country, you know, it wouldn't matter. People got it.
Danny had gotten married and got out of music. As a young man, he was into R&B and stuff like that. And then he won a contest from a radio station for the best song, and they recorded the song. And I guess that got him going again in music. And so he was good friends with Al Fraser. And I'd been in a band recently with Al Fraser, so Al brought me along.
What would you call a punk bluegrass band, I guess? Electric. Yeah, it was electric bluegrass on punk instruments. Of course, he was writing like crazy too at the time.
And called it the OK Time Wasters, sort of like a take on country, sort of, because Danny was now into sort of a bit of a Hank Williams, you know, that kind of thing, but with always a very large emphasis on his own music.
We were called the Wasters. I think we started out as the OK Time Wasters, and we thought that's a little lame, chop that off, and we'll become the Wasters. It was the punk era. And so we go out and we were playing the, you know, these country bar, you know, circuits up in northern Ontario, and doing 6 nights a week, living in those horrible conditions that they have in the hotels.
Danny would, in the OK Time Wasters, he'd be there with a cowboy hat on and a pinstripe full suit, you know, from the Sally Ann, and would be singing an acoustic guitar and playing his harmonica on his rack, much like he's doing today, I bet. And it was really good. But then, you know, he started to rock out a bit, you know, and put down the acoustic guitar, and it'd be running all over the place, doing the splits and everything. It's Danny always put on a great show.
It was heavy rock. And we toured for about, and played around for about a year. It was a wild band, purple spandex clothing and dangling earrings, frizzed out hair. We were a real motley crew.
This is Shoals, right by the lake here. This lake is so high, there's no boats allowed on it until the water drops. This is our last day in this beautiful area. We head for Vegas early tomorrow morning to play the Sand Dollar Lounge. I'm going in a complete circle. This is the southern part of the Okanagan Valley, the most southern part of the Okanagan Valley. Oh, I can do easy, I can do hard.
Really getting involved heavier with drugs. I started dealing speed. I fell behind in some debts, and some threats were made, and I realized, oh, I got to do something here. And so I started getting involved in some criminal activities, and pulled a few B&Es, and then I robbed a gas station.
He had to go to jail for a while for something that he had done through his, you know, various drug addictions at that time.
The lawyer told me that I was very fortunate. I had Judge Clooney, who was nicknamed Rosemary Clooney because he was known to shed tears sending a young man or a young woman to prison. And I got 15 months. So I mean, at that time, I was 20. When you're 20, 15 months, it seems like forever. Now, it doesn't seem like forever, but I was, it was quite, you know what, looking back now, it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
You know, he learned a lot in jail. He put a band together, he read a lot, so he made it a positive thing. So, you know, that's Danny.
This is what, 91? Danny, you've been going into prisons, singing for the guys and,
yes,
and identifying with them. You didn't do very much time in jail.
No, just enough to know that I never wanted to go back. I gravitated towards drugs for several reasons. One, I was at odds with my family, my dad mainly. But I started to travel at a young age. And when I was in Boston, I was 16. I seen things then, and people were smoking up, and I tried it. And then in Ottawa is where I first, I really started hitting up in Ottawa.
You are the miracle to have survived what you call living 20 years in a fog.
Yes.
So many addictions. And I just want to encourage some parents watching today, raised in a good Christian home, one of 8 children.
Yes.
You just, I don't even know if you can define why you chose a path of rebellion.
It's a long time ago. We were young, we were wild, and we were crazy, and we didn't always, you know, do what was best for ourselves. But at the same time, we were young musicians, you know, finding our way in the music business, and you know, trying to overcome any adversity or roadblocks that were thrown in the way.
All of a sudden, I was higher than I'd ever been before. And it was so, you know, everything about you is intensified. Hearing, sight, smells, all your senses are, it was just wild. And then, like most people that do something like that at that time, you get so high that you start getting false thoughts of who you really are. I just got caught up at a young age in the hippie movement, and being blind and ignorant and just kind of going with the flow of things. But after years of that, it started taking its toll, and I realized that, man, this isn't anywhere, and I had to hit absolute rock bottom. People that I tried to emulate, they didn't put the needle in my hand. I made that choice. But they helped make my choice easier because I wanted to be like Jimi Hendrix. I wanted to be like some of those other guys that I knew were using the needle. So, and I felt that I belonged now into their club because they were doing it. I'm kind of like them.
From sniffing glue, acid, speed, heroin, crime, suicide attempts.
Yeah.
It just seemed to escalate and compound.
See, when a person's addicted and you're using the needle, it's not just the drug, it's the ritual. And the ritual is as much as the addiction as the drug is.
So it had captured him, and it captured him for a long time. And from the stories that I was hearing from guys, it had him for quite a while.
I knew I was messed up in the head because when you have bad acid trips, my brains were scrambled, and I shot up a lot of MDA that some nights there was 3 of us, some nights it was just Terry Tivern and I, and you know, I'm talking like 20 and 30 caps. That's a lot of drugs. I remember for months I'd see butterflies, colored butterflies like that Taj Mahal record flying in front of me. I'd hear things, and I didn't know, how do you tell a doctor? Like all the time I was in Guelph, I was experiencing stuff like this, but I thought if I told the doctor that, I might end up in Penetanguishene. They might think I'm crazy in the straitjacket, so I suffered in silence.
And in the 80s and the late 70s and stuff, there was a lot of, we're young, we're all full of piss and vinegar, nobody's going to hurt us. And we all did some crazy stuff. But Danny was just such a, it seemed the more extreme the talent, the more extreme the craziness was.
When I knew I was going to jail, I started drinking heavier because, there was a bit of fear. But even then, I didn't think I needed to drink all the time. It was just something to do. But that night at that party, when I finished that first glass of whiskey, I put it down, a voice in my head said, "You don't need to talk to anybody. You found the answer. You're feeling pretty good right now." I'm thinking, yeah, I am. That's all you need. From that day on, I drank every single day. I was cross-addicted and didn't know it. At that time in my life, I was off the needle. I was no longer what I called a pincushion.
And jail did that for you?
Yes. The Lord worked with me in steps. But I couldn't face the day without a drink. So the other things that I would do, like snorting cocaine and then taking Valium to try to get some sleep, I didn't think I needed those things because I had to have a drink to face the day. But those were the major things that I was addicted to at the time going into the Donwood Clinic.
In his drunkenness, said to me one day, "I need a gig. I need to guest with you. You got to kickstart me somehow." I don't know what the words were. And I said, "Yeah, you got it, man. You got it." That part of his life wasn't fun to see because he was one of my heroes, because he showed me stuff that I didn't have in me.
When I first met Danny, I was in the mid-1980s and was in the blues circuit. We were playing the Fire Hall in London. It was a regular pit stop for us. We would host a Saturday morning jam or Saturday afternoon jams, and all the local musicians would come out. Cheryl Luskin would come out if she was in town, and Danny came out quite a few times. I didn't know him personally very well, except I heard his name around. Heard he was a good artist, but he seemed to be struggling a lot from what I noticed. I don't know what he was suffering. I could tell.
And he was living in London, and he was Danny Middlebrook then. And he was a force. He was a force to be reckoned with back then. But he was kind of in a self-destructive pattern at that point.
So let me take you on a little tour of where the Danny Butch saga in London all started. This was my hotel from 1980 to 1990. It's known as the Talbot Inn. A very unique place because on every Friday, Saturday, we'd have like 1,000 people in here. Through this door was Mingle's, the rock bar. That was a busy corner, right? Because that rock bar would bring in 600 people every Friday, sometimes even Thursday. Friday, Saturday, we had big rock bands, right? Next to it was the Cookery, which was a folk and jazz room. And that was about 100 seats. It was also a restaurant. And all the musicians would stay upstairs. You saw the size of that place, many, many rooms, right? And in fact, guys like Danny, who came back regularly, they had their favorite rooms. And then around the corner here, way down here, is the entrance to the fire hall. And the fire hall is where Danny Butch was performing, I would say probably about 3-4 times a year. Guess what? A lot of music, a lot of writing, a lot of friendships were developed there. And that's where Danny really shone, right? Because people liked him, right? And he would instigate good things, right? Hey guys, let's all vacuum our rooms today. This room here is that famous room that this was Danny's room when he stayed. And there's lots of adventures and misadventures in that room. But that connects to the story of Danny when he was having a tough time rehabbing himself and was asked by Brownie McGee to join him on the stage. It was like watching a resurrection in real time. Danny must have weighed about 110 pounds at the time. He was I think he sunk lower, right? But he was in really tough shape.
So 3 days I was in the room and coming down hard, and I was very sick. He came up to the room one night and he said, "Danny, you gotta sit in with Brownie and come down and watch him play." So what he said first.
You know, kind of cleaned himself up and came downstairs. And the story's a little bit different that I remember than Danny does, but Danny basically thinks that I twisted his arm, right? No, I just said, I got a guy, you know, would love to have you bring him on stage, no problem, right?
I'm really sick, I'm afraid. He said, "No, you'll be fine, Danny. God works in mysterious ways."
So I think he worked through 3 or 4 songs together, and he loved the accompaniment, you know. And everybody in that room knew it was a very important moment, you know. And the interplay between Brownie and Danny, you know, there was 2 real soul brothers, never met each other, right? You know, I guess I told him enough about the addiction that he was aware, and yeah, like I say, a real life resurrection, you know, right there it happened.
This is the rest of the story.
The year was 1983. When I met old Brownie McGee. Down at the old fire hall, 3 days coming down hard. Yeah, old Brownie McGee. Yeah, old Brownie McGee. Say everybody needs somebody on your bone.
The come down from alcohol was so wicked, worse than anything. I was seeing things they call the DTs, and sharks and demons were coming at me, trying to bite me and gnaw at me. It was petrifying. It was horrible.
You know, in that time, you know, people were influenced by Lou Reed and, you know, Jim Morrison, and he was really, I thought, like that. He was like really emotional, but he was also actually falling down on stage and kind of mumbling incoherently at times. And Alec Fraser took over and started singing, and Danny just basically couldn't play. It was the 80s, and there was a lot of bad stuff going on everywhere, and we overindulged in everything, and our stage shows were great, you know, because of it, but you know, you can't maintain that for very long.
The guy came up to her. He said, "Look, Debbie, we hired Danny for his music. Now, I'm not saying he wasn't funny tonight, but if I want to hire a comedian, then I'll hire a comedian and I'll advertise it." Because back then I was kind of into W.C. Fields, and I just got carried away with it. He said, "You need to get Danny help because he's committing professional suicide."
So we had him as a guest a few times, and it wasn't fun. It was tough. You knew beyond the sickness that there was just the greatest talent. The word unique this was God given to him, and maybe with him finding God saved him, because I saw him fall off stage after attempting to do a 45-minute set with my band as a guest.
Alcoholism, it was a nightmare for me. I can't explain what it was like getting up in the morning, and like when you're a speed freak and you start getting paranoid and you need to do another whack, That's a fear that it's very real. It's like a bad acid trip. Well, without the drink, you shake, you get scared, you hole up. Some people don't even like going out of their house, and they develop agoraphobia.
He was always so captivating. Even at his weakest, sickest time, people just went, what is that? He's a force. He's been given a God-given talent, and I don't mean God-given in the biblical way. He's been given a very special gift.
Every heartache is a gift with wisdom to impart. When I cast away all my scones, carry me home. 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 Carry me home, Lord. Carry me.
We're heading out from Calgary, heading to Kamloops for our gig in Abbotsford at the House of James this Friday, the 26th. Hope to see you all out there.
Looking back today when we first met, love got me through one hell of a mess. I don't say that lightly, 'cause hell it was.
So finally I said, God, I need to find somebody who can love me in spite of myself. I had no front teeth then. I thought it looked cool. And Debi came along. Prior to the rehab, I said, God, I know I'm a mess. Could you send someone who would love me in spite of myself? And God sent Debi. October 31st, 1986. And we kind of hit it off. I was a sight to see. My glasses are broken. She brought me home to meet her mom and her sisters. She was quite brave. And I carried my bag, and I had all my bottles of whiskey and beer in there. I remember I snuck to the washroom because I got this... You can't sneak when your bag's going. I sensed this vibe in the air that I wasn't the most loved person in the room. And as I was in the bathroom taking a drink, I could hear them out there. What are you doing? He's a bum. Get rid of him. Oh, I need more courage. I came out there. But, you know, God had her plan. We started seeing each other, and she came back to Pat's, and nothing happened at first. I really liked her. And it didn't take her long to see that I had troubles or issues, and she wanted me to get some help.
You know, more and more people were coming and saying, you need to do something. And I guess he was ready. You know, it came down to, I need help.
He came out and I gotta admire him for what he did, because he was a mess before he went in. He wasn't gonna last much longer.
It's funny, I saw a picture of him when he was in the bad old days. And there was a physiological change. I saw the picture, I said, yeah, that's Danny. But there was a hardness to him because of his lifestyle and where he was at the time.
Debi saddled me down with a couple of suitcases, a guitar, a briefcase, another briefcase with my notes. She had the presence of mind to think that I might get cold feet after she dropped me off, but with no means of transportation, she knew how attached I was to all my writing.
And maybe I'll just drink beer, I won't drink the hard liquor kind of deal. And that didn't really work because he was still hiding the hard liquor in the back of the toilet or wherever it is that, you know, he could hide them.
I was put in a place called Happy Valley. And I don't know why they came up with that title. It's anything but happy. And it's a time of the toxins coming out of your body. And it was a very frightening experience. Hallucinations and just troubling thoughts. They call it the DTs. And it was a terrible withdrawal. The worst of anything that I ever suffered, counting the drugs and that.
So it took a bit of persuading. I'm sure he's told the story many times about how he went into the Donwood for the initial interview and was so inebriated they kicked him out. Although he tells the story that he went back and reasoned with them, he didn't. I went back and reasoned with them and said, like, do you really think if he could be sober that he would need to come? He wouldn't need to. So we managed to get him in there.
After a week of Happy Valley, I'm sitting on my mattress. They gave me my own room, and I'm looking out the window, and I'm reflecting on my life, and I realized what a failure I was. And when I started reflecting on everything that went wrong, and that I was now 35, didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, and the enormity, the weight of my failures, I looked to the washroom and I thought of hanging myself from in the shower.
And then when I think about the actual putting him into that and then the time that he spent in recovery, that's probably the quickest turnaround to seeing, looking back and really noticing the difference in who he was and what he was doing beforehand. He had really spiraled to the point of he wasn't going to recover from it.
I said, Doc, if I take these pills, I know my first train of thought is, why wait till you're scared? Do it now. Take it and get in a nice, easy feeling. I said, I'll be right back in here. So I didn't self-medicate in that regard, taking the medicine that he offered.
To actually be in the clubs with it around you all the time, because people are offering you the stuff constantly, or they're offering you shots. Let's do a shot, let's do this, you know. It takes a lot of willpower to be able to just go, no, I don't do that anymore.
And in May the 8th, Debbie came to pick me up, and I remember, we joke about this on stage, but I remember when she came and I did look at her clean and sober, that I thought, man, she's a hot babe.
I think she's the biggest part of his transformation, you know. Absolutely, you know, he needed an island to find. He had to find that island so he could start rebuilding himself, you know, and to have somebody that was worth living for, because he didn't think much of himself at those days.
Because he had captured the demon and locked him away forever. I think the demon is gone forever with Danny, and he was finding the Lord at this time period too, and Debi, and so he had a couple of really good partners that were going to take care of him.
I know what it was that got me through. It was my faith in God, simple as that. And as weak as my faith was, if you've got a small mustard seed faith, you can still move mountains, the good book says. And you know, that can mean literally, or can mean mountains of doubt, mountains of fear, mountains of lack. If you're thinking positive and you've got the God factor involved, nothing is impossible. 1987, I'm sitting on the edge of my bed and I was contemplating suicide. and I called out to God, and He answered me. I didn't see things right away, but the minute I called out to God, I didn't even ask Him into my heart. I just started a conversation with Him. Things in the heavens happened right then and there.
He got pretty close to the edge, a period of his life. This was a long time ago. This is my take on it all.
Sure.
Danny got to the edge, and we all thought that we were going to lose him. And when somebody gets in that position, there's not much you can do. You can't save him. You know, he's going to go over the edge. Danny got to the edge, and he found something within himself to turn it around and start believing in himself, and he came back. And he came back a better person, a better musician, a better songwriter.
And even when he got clean, he couldn't even get a gig as Middlebrook because nobody wanted to touch him.
In order to stop something, most of the time you have to basically stop hanging around with the people that are engaging you. You know, it's like losing a bunch of friends. But you know, if they're doing cocaine and you want to quit cocaine, then you can't really hang around with those people.
He said my triglyceride count, which was in my blood level, would take up to a year to normalize. It was normal after 1 month. 1.8, you're a teetotaler, never done anything in your life. 3.5, you're a heart attack victim. I was 5.9. 1 month later, it was 1.9. And he said, your insides, your bleeding ulcers disappeared, and your insides are that of someone who's never done anything. Do you know what I'm trying to tell you, Danny? And I said, yeah, I'm going to be all right. He said, more than all right, this is a miracle.
And it's before he got really focused on what Danny Middlebrook became Danny Brooks, and Danny Middlebrook became a spiritual, super intense talent that focused on the talent instead of the negative. So it was really, really wonderful watching him grow from a messed up soul to a person that could help other messed up souls.
And I just simply asked God to come into my heart to clean me up. And Micah 6:8 is probably the best verse that sums up what a Christian is. And it says, what does God require of you, O man, but to love justice, mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. Coming into the Mission Prison here. We just did the Ferndale. This is our second prison today. Debbie and I are in fine form playing, and the boys are pretty cool, enjoying it. It's good to be back. We've been here about half a dozen times, I think. Actually more.
I went down to the river to cleanse my troubled soul. I went down to the river, found my way back home. Yes, I found.
Danny started coming around 88, 89. Clean. I want to do this again. Like, I can do this now. I don't do that anymore. Well, come and be a guest, because my Sunday gig was a guest. And not only that, he was 38 or 40 years of age now. Now he's got maturity. I had never seen him play guitar until about 88. And there he was, like harmonica, playing guitar, real soulful, really focused on the kind of music he wanted to do. And he was a force.
I've got a family back in San Antonio. Lord knows I miss them from the depths of my soul. I'm gonna see them, and I know as soon as I has a mind under control. And later I can feel it now. Our ship is gonna come on in. Everybody, we all need a friend. When you're waiting for a ship to come in.
We were standing in front of the Silver Dollar Hotel. I used to play here in the late 70s with my band Middlebrook and the Wasters. The age you entered into the fog, when you come out of that fog, I'm still 20 some odd years junior of my 65.
So you're still sober?
Oh yeah, 30 years,
Okay.
thanks to her. Over the years, I changed my name to Danny Brooks. I played here as the Danny Brooks Band many times with all kinds of Toronto players. I did a music clinic in Pickering, and I tell young kids, I said, don't ever think that when you're playing music that because you're stoned, you're playing better. I said, that's a big lie.
Yeah.
I said, most of my friends are dead from overdoses. And this whole area was a real hotbed for music. Well, Grossman's Tavern brings back a lot of memories, a lot of great musicians, a lot of great bands. Matter of fact, every musician that I've played with in Toronto at one time or another has often played here at Grossman's. And when I met Jim Dickinson, I met him at the Sun Records Cafe and Studio. I noticed there was a commotion down the cafe way, and Jim kind of turned around and he said, oh, that's Rufus Thomas. He's just showing people the guided tour. And then I looked at the table, and Johnny Cash, B.B. King, Mr. Blue Suede Shoes, Carl Perkins, Roy Orbison. I said, are these for real? He said, yeah, Danny. He had a bit of a grin on his face. He said, I picked this table specifically. He said, when they signed a contract with Sam Phillips, this made it official when they carved their name into this table. And you know, right then and there, the term is a Southern thing. I never would have written that song had I not been sitting at that table seeing all those names carved. And so that's became the name of the record I put out in 1998. He told me in my music he heard the conflict and the resolution. He said, I can work with you, Danny. But he was all business. He's the one who said to me, Danny, have you stood on the banks of the Mississippi River and let it speak to you? And I said, no, Jim, I haven't. I said, I've driven along, it doesn't count. You got to stand on the bank of the Mississippi River and let it speak to you. He said, we're going to take a session break and you're going to go up the river. And boy, that river spoke to me. And at that juncture, boy, my heart, the last piece was put into place of who I really was as a Southern soul man. Came back in the studio and Jim took a look at me and he had a smile and said, yeah, Danny, I can tell that river spoke to you, didn't it? And I said, it sure did, Jim.
I've been all around this big old world. I can't really complain. One thing that really taught me a lesson of gone bad driving you insane. Well, I've lived on the mountain, valley below, tasted success, tears and sorrow, found the hard way on the shining gold. Too many roads lead you away from home. Everybody need a little rest for the soul. Everybody needs you loving on the road. Ain't no place like home. Give me that homestead boogie.
When he did get Richard Bell, when Richard Bell came back
to Toronto. That was a very special thing. I mean, Richard was he was in that class of people like Doug Riley and Scott Cushney and from that sort of era. And he was quite legendary.
So we're at this nightclub, and I was told Richard Bell's in the audience. And I said, Richard, do you happen to have an accordion with you? He says, yeah, I've got one out in the car. And I said, go and get it. He went and got it. We got him on stage. He played the rest of the night. And we just loved it. And from that moment on, we got talking about how it'd be nice to do a record.
He was a total gentleman and just a class guy. And he is a musical master. And he's... he can take the roots music and put it down on paper. For instance, if you want to have the horn section, you want to arrange the harmonies correctly, he can do that for you.
I was lucky enough a few years ago to his recording sessions when the late Richard Bell was producing him. And I went to the studio and I watched the two of them go back and forth with each other. There was a spiritual guy, Ricky Bell, who played with the band in the 90s. And, you know, he played with a bunch of other groups and they were good for each other.
Not long before he passed on, I looked at him and I said, Richard, I don't know how you can be so joyful, and I know you're in pain. I said, I hope I'm a tenth as brave as you are. He said, oh, Danny, when it happens for you, you'll be like this and more. I know you will be. He said, look, I've lived a good life. I've made my peace with God. I'm all right with it. I've done a lot of things. I've lived a very good life.
I used to mess around, but I don't mess around anymore. I used to play all the angles, but I don't play that way no more. Since my knee hit the ground, good Lord scraped me up from the killing floor. My mama told me, son.
Good day, y'all. What a beautiful day. Thank you, God. We just left Vegas behind us about 200 miles. We're going on 93 south. We're about 400 miles to Lordsburg, New Mexico, where we spend the night before playing in Hatch, New Mexico on Saturday. Had a great gig at the Sand Dollar Lounge. Met some great people, and we'll go back there in November when we're heading out to California.
Oh, I never meant to hurt or desert you. I never meant to see you cry. If I get the chance to make things right, here's the key to my heart this time.
As soon as I started playing with him, I knew this guy is the real deal. You can tell right away when somebody is just genuine.
Like Danny is an on and off switch. When he sings, if you're sitting, he's showing you a song in your bedroom. It's the same intensity. He's playing a huge gig. He only knows one way. He's got one gear, and that's full out.
To work that hard,
I have a 9 to 5 job. I get to shut my job off when I get home. He doesn't. He can't. And he's got to set up the tour for next year and 6 months from now and a year and a half from now. His mind is always turning.
I've got friends that I've turned on to him in the last couple of years in New Orleans, and when he goes through, and they just say, "Why isn't this guy famous?" You know, and I said, you know, what's the answer to that? Is it luck? I don't know.
You know, there's a big difference in his life from his early days to where he's at now. A huge difference. You know, he's a very spiritual guy now, and I think that has really helped him push his music and his personal life forward into a really good place.
We sat in with each other's bands. You know, he'd come and sing with my band. I'd go and play and sing with his. And we were just kindred spirits.
I swear, to this day, I'm on stage sometimes, and Danny comes through.
He makes you feel like he's singing directly to you. Levon Helm had that.
You know, he'd do a couple of Springsteen songs and he'd say, let's do some of my stuff, because his heart wasn't in it. And that's how, just hard work is how we worked.
To stay in this business, you want to plant your seeds, as he has many, many years ago. And, you know, all the branches, all the musicians, we've just kind of branched off, but we're all connected and he's managed to keep us stayed connected.
And he's faced so many challenges that more than one person that I know, including myself, would never, ever, ever keep doing what he's doing, and with such great enthusiasm in his life.
Me and Danny can play harp at the same time, and we're both listening to each other, and it's a fun conversation. You know, there's no inferior thoughts left in Danny's head, which to a guy like me is really valuable. I need older mentors like that, and I try and be like that to dudes that are younger than me. Like, I'm just like, be loving.
A beautiful a Japanese 4-pickup early 60s guitar, and I always wanted one. I used to, when I was a kid, I'd go to the pawn shops and look at guitars. Couldn't afford one, and the fanciest one was the 4-pickup with all the dials and wheels and stuff, and he gave me one. It doesn't have a brand name on it, but I still have it, and I used it to make a record some years ago. I played it on something, and it sounded fabulous.
Danny just knocked me out right off the bat. I mean, that voice, you don't hear many voices like that. And then the songwriting. And then once you get to know him, the person.
An awful lot of people, when they get to be about 40, that's when the blinders come off and they reevaluate. And most of them leave. And the ones that don't leave at that time are the ones that, you know, they can't. Music, you haven't picked music, music's picked you.
He leaves you with a feeling, and it's a good feeling. You know, it's a message of hope and love and, you know, the nice things in life. And I guess it's his sincerity, you know, absolute sincerity.
I sing about what I know. And Danny knows, to me, the most important thing is actually giving up on the temporal world, not giving up on it, but knowing that it's second to the celestial world. Like, he knows that, and a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't even want to hear that.
Really good at delivering a message of honesty and spirituality. So when you got to share that as a musician, it permeates through your body. You share it, and it's just an osmosis thing that happened with Danny. He could just make you a part of him.
Early in the 70s, he was pretty basic rock and roll, but I think over this time period, he's become much more sophisticated in his influences. So he's pretty legit when it comes to whether it's R&B, sort of a traditional form of rock and roll, whether it's almost a reggae influence thing, a gospel music, of course, you know, I mean, his gospel emotions and that, the way that comes out with his writing is amazing.
You know, performance is always here, whether it be rehearsal, whether it be in front of, 10 people in a bar, whether it be in front of a theater or a festival crowd. There's no change in his intensity. And I think that's one of the things that Danny, the audience sees it. The audience sees that. The musicians see that. The musicians feed off of that. And that's what's always been so astounding to me about Danny, is his his honesty in the music.
But what was more interesting than my take on Danny was Little Mac's take on Danny. So this is a guy whose wife's cousin was Little Walter, childhood friend of James Cotton. This guy was like, there's just not many guys like this left. This guy was like a real deal guy. And so I was interested, like, how will Little Mac respond to Danny and what he's laying down? He loved it, man. He just loved it.
On the weekend, I would see a band, and not only would I dance, which is getting your mind into your body, which is, any yoga teacher will tell you that's good for you. Put your mind here where it's real. You know, you're in your physical body, and you're hearing messages about, they might be painful things, but these things all need to be faced before you can move on to happiness. Like, I broke up with my girlfriend, you know, I did her wrong. All this stuff, like, you have to deal with like regrets and things you didn't do right. And oftentimes we'll sing about that. And then on the flip side, we'll sing about transcending it. And they're like, it's like church.
And I had the privilege of playing with a fella named Rusty Weir. He was the kind of guy that if there was 5 people or 5,000 people, when he hit the stage, it was 150% spot on, no matter what his problems were. And Danny's the only other guy that I've ever worked with that has that magic, that can command his talents just raw. Come on out and take it. He takes everything by the horns and goes with it. I think when we started out, we didn't know how long we were going to be in this business. We didn't know how to really handle, living a life with no rules, so to speak. And we made mistakes. All of us made mistakes. And here we are. We're on the other side now, and we've got past all of that, and we're still, and like in Danny's case, he's still putting out fabulous music. He still sings really great. He puts on a good show. He's soulful. He's one of our sort of heroes.
He's like a working class musician. He's the farthest thing from a prima donna, Danny's a guy who's just sort of rolls up his sleeve and does the heavy lifting.
Anyone who's walked the path from ignorance to wisdom, I want to hear their story. Danny's walked that path. I saw him do ignorant things that hurt himself and was kind of not a good show. And then I've seen him like split my skull open and make me see greater possibilities of loving and living.
I'm just going to savor this because it's not going to happen all the time. So that's how you cherish your opportunities, and you soak it in. And like, I've been around long enough to know that it's not always going to be like that. You got the funky little gigs and this and that. So when there's a real gem, you really appreciate it. And I'm thankful for Danny to give me that chance to be part of such a thing.
I said, come, let's go see Danny Brooks tonight. They said, well, who's Danny Brooks? I said, well, he's a guy from Canada that acts like he's from Louisiana.
I told him, I said, come over to stay at our place. We got plenty of room. I didn't even know what part of town he was in or anything. And he didn't know where I was. And he told me later on, he said, man, you invited me into your home. You'd never met me. I said, well, so, I came from a big family. There was always a lot of people around. He said, I could have been a flake or something. I said, you might still be. I don't know. I just met you. I don't know what you are. But you were cold and I got space, so.
We got a record deal and they gave him money for new teeth. And he got new teeth and he lost them immediately. And he left them in a shot glass on his amp. And so that was in Hamilton. And so we get back to Toronto and Daddy's going, oh man, I lost my new teeth. So we drove back, got the bar to open up, and we looked around the stage. And then finally we found him in the dishwasher in that cup. And there they were, And he got his teeth back, like, geez.
He was doing a Woodstock Revisited thing. This was maybe the first year into our dating. He was going to do Saturday Night Live's version of Joe Cocker with the green garbage bag and the whole thing. And I don't know where he got these fake blood capsules, but all of a sudden he fell down and he had blood gushing. And I'm just watching him from somewhere in the audience. And actually I was doing backgrounds then, so I'm watching him on the stage and you're thinking, what am I going to do? And guys from the troops pick him up and carry him from the stage all the way up the stairs to the office, and then he stands up.
Most famous story that I ever heard about him going around was he was on stage and he was completely shit-faced or something, and he passed out, and everybody got really concerned. They thought he might be dead. You know, he was that out of it. Yeah, Kevin knows what I'm talking about. So somebody, you know, they're trying to figure out, you know, do we call 911? Is Danny okay? So somebody got the bright idea. They take a harmonica, put it up to his mouth, and sure enough, a note came out, right? And so Danny's okay. You know, the music's still happening.
How passionate he was. If you're gonna be sick during the show, walk by behind the drummer, puke, and get back out and finish the show. In fact, that could be part of the show. Somebody's gonna be watching you.
He was just fresh into his sobriety and working the program, and he got a call from an agent offering him a beer commercial. And I know that, you know, we were both doing background work for $12 an hour, and Danny had this other job delivering baby cribs to some pretty sketchier areas in Toronto. You know, it was financially tough times, but Danny turned that commercial down.
It was 2002, and I unfortunately had been down traveling in the South, which we enjoy, and I came down with a virus. One day, I get sent this Northern Gospel All-Stars album. Anyway, there's this guy named Danny Brooks. And I will admit, I wasn't familiar with Danny at all. I hadn't heard of Danny. So I'm sitting there, and I'm off work for over a month. And I'm a little scared, a little nervous. Suddenly, I hear Still Standing Tall. And I can't tell you how it affected me. That doesn't happen very often. And I look at the album jacket and I went, Danny Brooks. So I played again, and I played again. And I took a break, and I came back, and I'm listening to this. And suddenly, out of nowhere, and there was nobody to cue me, I'm all alone at the house, I raised my hands up, like this. And as corny as it sounds, I thought, I'm gonna stop worrying about this. I'm gonna give it up to the Lord and pray to God something works out.
A few years ago, when my dad was alive, and he was going through a certain amount of depression and being sick and everything. And I called Danny up and I said, you know, I got a favor to ask you. How would you feel about going to see my dad? Because my parents absolutely adored Danny. They thought he was the greatest thing. Loved his music, loved him, you know. So he said, yeah, absolutely. So he come up, we brought the guitars up, we sat down around the table. My dad lit up like a Christmas tree, he just loved it.
Danny Brooks' story is classic shot at redemption. He starts out young in life as an entertainer, has success, tours all over the place, making good money. Then years of battling with the demons, addiction, etc. Finally, near-death experiences, several. And finally he pulls out of that and completely turns his life around. Now he's an ordained minister, he's authored a book, Miracles for Breakfast. He's got how many CDs out, 8 or 10 CDs, all self-financed. And I think his whole life now seems to be about paying it forward. You know, going into the prison systems, you know, administering to the people who really need help. And it's tough work. But he steps up and does it. They're changing people's lives, and I think that's a lot for a musician to do.
Oh, this world is not my friend. Build me up to break me, leave me and forsake me. Oh, this world is not my friend. I have traveled far and wide. I have traveled far and wide, feeling my condition, running from my admission. And I'm tired, so tired of living life. Tried to make this world my friend. I tried to make this world my friend. Tried to make this world my friend. Yes, I did. Let me high and dry in the end.
But I'd like to be remembered as someone who showed up to sing on every gig and gave it and left it all out on the stage and not ever hold anything back.
I'm broken, lost with arms wide open. Won't you save a sinner such as I?